Now, I was in Walmart the other day, and I happened to be in their electronics section, so I start to look around for any games or accessories that I might want to pick up, and I happened to come across the Hori Pad. This is the cheaper option to the Pro controller that was talked about a while ago. Kind of disappeared for a while. We didn't hear about it, and then all of a sudden it was released a week ago, I think. And that's the thing. They didn't have any announcements, nothing. These just showed up in Walmart one day when I was going through there because I hadn't seen it the day before, and there was no real announcement made. And that kind of threw me a little bit, so I picked one up at the price of $30, and I thought, well, let's take a look and see how good this Hori Pad can be. So of course I opened it up, took a look inside, and there's not much in there, aside from the set of instructions that come with, well, everything at this point. And they do tell you how to use the turbo function, because this controller, yes, does have a turbo function. Not much. Taking a look around, though, it does at least have a long cable, which is something that people complain about with some of these controllers. Happens to be a 10-foot cable, so you don't really have to worry too much about how close you have to sit to the Switch itself. Taking a look around the controller, though, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to tell you why. First off, the sticks are fine. They move and really glide around no problem. I do think the travel on the clicks could be better, as they don't seem to, there's not a good feeling when you click down on the sticks. Almost like, well, I think I pressed it. You do hear a click, but as opposed to other controllers, it's a little off-putting. Now, from there, you'll notice the bottom left, there is a D-pad. Great, right? Well, this is where things really kind of go off the tracks for me. See, the D-pad is technically there, but it's not there. Now let me explain what I'm talking about. See the D-pad there? That actually pops off, and below that are 4 separate buttons for each direction, kind of like the Joy-Con is, and that's a problem. So with the D-pad on, it's very mushy feeling, because obviously you're pushing a piece of plastic down to then push those buttons. And it doesn't feel good, especially if you go between directions. Let's say you're playing Street Fighter and you try to do like quarter circle forward or something, you decide to be using a D-pad. Doesn't feel good. It's very mushy. And then on the other side, if you want to take that D-pad off and then just press the D-pad buttons, I guess you'd call them, that are like the Joy-Con, you're pushing into a divot. See, those are lowered drastically, and it's very weird and awkward feeling to push down on those buttons. Now, I'm not at all sure why Hori decided to do this, why they decided to use this odd D-pad design, because in neither way that you use it is good. Neither of them. And what's weird here is, why wouldn't you just use a regular D-pad? The reason the Joy-Cons have to be the way they are is because Nintendo wanted them to also become their own independent controller, and using a D-pad for button placement on the left Joy-Con would just be weird. I think most of us understand why it has to be buttons on the Joy-Cons, but none of us understand why it has to be buttons on this Hori Pad. Now, I also went ahead and took the Hori Pad apart to take a look inside, and overall, it's not terrible. Taking the screws out, straight Phillips head screws, not a problem. It comes apart, and I noticed something pretty quickly. There was a place here for rumble, at least in the early designs. I assume when they realized that Nintendo was going to use something different than what was in, say, the 360, or maybe they didn't get any kind of clearance to use 360 type motors or PS3, PS4 type motors, they opted just to not put any rumble in it all. Or these were kind of designs left around from a different controller that they just pulled over for this pad. Either way, it was a little odd to see a bracket for a rumble motor, but no actual rumble motor. And I mean, that's kind of some of the missing features they had to take out so that they could make it cheaper. For example, there's no gyros, there's no motion controls at all, and there is no rumble at all, which leaves the controller feeling very light even, almost cheap to a point. I mean, it is cheap technically price-wise, but I like to have the controller in a little bit of weight. That was an issue I had back with the PS3 controller when they did 6-axis with no rumble. It just felt light and kind of cheap. Now, looking at the board itself, it looks fine. They opted for some odd capacitors that were bent over. Generally, you can use smaller ones, but again, that may have been a cost-saving measure, or maybe that's just what they had available to them. Overall, the board itself is fine. There's nothing too inherently cheap or crazy about it. It's a printed circuit board that gets the job done in terms of a wired controller, so not much to see inside. Now, when I actually tried the controller out, it worked fine. I've been on a Mighty Gunvolt Burst kick recently, so I tested it in there because, well, it's a serious platformer that does need some precision, and overall, it worked fine. I didn't have any issues using the joystick, but man, the D-pad just does not work for me. It really doesn't. Going from something like a Pro controller to this, it really is night and day. Now, you may have remembered how I said that there was a turbo button on this controller, and yes, there is, and it's pretty easy to use. So you hold down the turbo button in the middle, and then you decide which button you want to have that turbo button apply to. So you hold the turbo button, you press, for example, Y, which shoots in Mighty Gun Volt, and then whenever I hold down the shoot button, which is Y in this case, it will do a massive rapid fire succession of button presses. Now, if I hold the turbo button down again and press it one more time, it will make it so that it is always pressing that button. You don't have to hold it down, it's just constantly pressing, which makes you pretty much a walking death machine in Mighty Gun Volt. So overall, is this controller worth it? Well, yes and no. So if you're buying this, say, for younger kids who are very rough on electronics, you don't want to buy them a $70 Pro controller, a $30 Hori Pad controller is fine, it would work. Or another instance where I figured this would be better because of its cheap price, where it's less than half the price of the Pro controller, less than half the price of 2 Joy-Cons, is if you have people coming over for, say, a LAN party. It's much easier to go out and buy 3 of these for 90 bucks rather than 3 Pro controllers for $210, especially if it's for a weekend, or if you have a bunch of friends that come over a lot and you just want to get controllers that aren't going to be used a ton, but when they come over, you don't mind if they throw them or something. But as a personal controller, something you're going to buy for yourself that you're going to put a ton of time onto, hours and hours, and you're expecting it to have high precision, pass on this, save your money, get a Nintendo Pro controller. It's still the best controller to use on this system, I think personally. And keep in mind, more controllers will come. This is not the only controller that we will see from third parties. There could be higher quality ones, there could be lower quality ones, but either way, I don't like the design of this D-pad. They were so close. If they just made the D-pad normal, it would have been fine for me. I wouldn't have minded. But in this case, it's kind of a deal breaker for me personally, so I say really only get this if you need a cheap second or third controller and stick to your Pro controller for now for personal use. Hope you guys enjoyed this look at the Hori Pad for the Nintendo Switch. Let me know what you think about the D-pad and any other things about the controller that you may have seen here or that you've experienced after buying it yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.